NaughtyDog as a studio has a very intriguing history. There aren't many developers who have created vastly different experiences and yet remain unchanged in their quality output for almost 30 years. They invoke a pretty varied slew of feelings and memories depending on who you ask. For some, it'll be the grounded, incredibly polished experience of The Last of Us, or maybe the intrepid and exhilarating adventures of Uncharted. Even the tonally transitional series of Jak and Daxter is held in quite high regard. For me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, our first memories of this studio sit snug in the leather-bound palms of the orange marsupial Crash Bandicoot. Despite not being their first game, I believe many would agree that it makes sense to start an analytical look at Naughty Dog's gaming library here. Not to disregard games like Rings of Power or Way of the Warrior as being disinteresting, it's more of a personal bias. I don't have much to say about their earlier titles anyway, having never played them before, and don't particularly have a drive to delve into them, but maybe one day. Today, however, I'll be taking an introspective look at the first Crash Bandicoot game, and eventually the rest of the trilogy, how the games are on the surface, and what they mean to me personally. I'll be using footage mainly from the remake with smatterings of the original. What I say about one will more than likely apply to the other, though I will make distinctions when relevant. I don't particularly care to dedicate an entire video to the remake trilogy, but still believe I have things to say about it. So regardless of what your hang-ups are with the Sane trilogy, too bad. It's what you'll be looking at most of the time. The year is 1994. Way of the Warrior, Naughty Dog's most recent gaming venture, wraps development and is published by Universal Interactive. The studio has already begun work on their next big project. They make an educated and almost obvious to us now guess to what the next hit gaming genre will be, the 3D platformer. At the time, 2D platformers were at their absolute peak, Super Mario World and Donkey Kong Country being the golden examples of recent releases. But on the horizon sits another dimension, itching to be explored. It seemed inevitable that eventually games were going to standardize that way, but in 1994 it hadn't quite been refined. Development continued for the next couple of years, a majority of it accredited to making the very nature of the game work. Crash Bandicoot was then released on September the 9th, 1996 in the US and November 8th for Europe audiences. Direction tailed by Jason Rubin with head of programming Andy Gavin, the two sides of the Naughty Dog coin. One of the first and frankly most important things to say about the first Crash Bandicoot is that the Sane trilogy is almost objectively the better version of the game. I say almost because there's always going to be one person that says otherwise, but whatever. The original has aged rather poorly. Some may say it's unfair to knock a game that predates its remake by 21 years, but I'm approaching these games as I play them now, today. I won't consciously choose to play the 96 version over the remake purely out of some warped respect to the past. I think we are fully capable at honouring the strides game development made in the past while holding the modern standard to them today. In 1996, Crash Bandicoot was obviously revolutionary for the time, but with limited save points and tedious gem requirements alone, there is no reason for me to ever return to the original unless I was playing it for the pure fact that it's the original. And even then I'd question my sanity. I don't think this applies as much with the other two installments, but we'll talk about that when we get to them. The opening cutscene has the villain, Dr. Neo Cortex, creating and ultimately failing to control Crash, a genetically mutated Bandicoot who was set to be the leader of an army of mutated animals. Crash gains all the strength from the experiments but retains his free will, which he exercises by jumping out of the castle window. Uh-oh! His escape was hasty, however, as he leaves a fellow Bandicoot Tawner behind. He then washes up on Insanity Beach, picks himself up, and embarks on a cross-island trek back to rescue her. It's as cut and dry as a plot can be. So inconsequential to the game that in the original, you'd have to wait on the menu screen to even see this cutscene. Before this generation of gaming, you'd be lucky to get any form of story from something that wasn't an RPG. Platformers would at the most get a few text boxes at the start or whatever the developers wrote in the manual that came physically with the game. It's cute, but at this point in the franchise, not very important. Now we officially begin maneuvering our marsupial as we traverse the iconic islands of the first Crash Bandicoot. The first level or stretch of gameplay is in my opinion one of, if not the most important part of a gaming experience. After all, it's the chance to display and prove why your game is worth someone's while. It's the classic World 1 Level 1 design philosophy started by the Super Mario Brothers. It has to introduce and teach the player how the basic mechanics work, tease how these mechanics may get more interesting the further into the game you go, while also being essentially the easiest part of the game. Behind the scenes, it's an insane juggling act that needs to be done right to cement the player as a fan and future customer of the series. Luckily for Crash, he has Insanity Beach. The level starts with a very Looney Tunes animation of Crash waking up on the beach and quickly spinning into gameplay. We travel from the beach into deep jungle, an environmental change that reflects the journey we are going on. This is something that's kept up through the entire game. As the levels continue, they fade from natural landscapes to dark ruins to dangerous industrial areas. It doesn't just serve in telling the story through gameplay, but also subtly lets you know that the difficulty is being shifted up. New area means different enemies, scarier platforms, and harder challenges. We're also introduced to a large number of crates in this level. Crates were a surprisingly late addition to Crash 1 to fill out a lot of the empty space that couldn't be taken up with any more high polygon enemies. So these simple 6-sided boxes were created. I think even at the time, NaughtyDog had no idea the amount of versatility they could conjure up with these. As we see more in future games, they act as not only temporary platforms, but as means to collect the few collectibles this game offers. Wumpa Fruit is what you'll see the most. A standard crate will give you 1, a bouncy crate can give you 10, and a question mark crate can give you a bunch, or an extra life, which also have their own dedicated crate. Bouncy crates with the yellow arrow allow Crash to launch higher than normal, again allowing for some creative platforming challenges. We are also introduced to possibly the most valuable crate to the player, new or old, Aku Aku. According to the manual, which once again supplies more story than the game itself, Aku Aku is a spirit who senses Crash's self-appointed journey to take down Dr. Cortex, and helps out by enchanting some boxes to contain some of his power that act as protection for Crash. Every mask you have equals damage you can take without dying. The only thing he can't save you from is from various forms of death zones, pitfalls, water, that sort of thing. Once you collect your third mask, which I remind you happens in this very first level, you'll be given temporary invincibility. It still can't save you from those bottomless pits, but enemies and even boxes are automatically destroyed. Without invincibility, however, enemies and boxes are usually taken out by the spin, Crash's signature move. If you're a first-time player, you probably had enough time on the beach to figure out how to spin. In Crash 1, both square and circle trigger the spin. Most enemies and boxes can also be taken out by a simple jump, the more Mario-like method. As you move through more of this level, you get a feel for how the game will be playing with perspective. You've spent the first portion of the level going forward, but now on these ruined walls, you'll be going up, and once you reach this part, you're presented with a split path. If you go right, but have ran out of the invincibility you recently got, you may feel it a bit daunting to cross this box bridge. You've just started the game. Jumping box to box seems a bit advanced for your taste. If you go left, you get a much simpler path. Had you still had invincibility, you may have figured out that walking across the box bridge destroys the boxes behind you, teaching you just that little bit more about the interaction you have with boxes. It would have been cool to see a little bit more of this in the game, but I suppose the coordination it would take to make sure you have 3 Aku Akus before a puzzle would start to get a little messy with the design. Once you reach the end of level portal, and you were good enough to collect all the boxes, even the 2 down the split path, you'll be rewarded with a gem. Until the end game, gems don't serve any obvious purpose other than motivation to truly master all the levels. But here's where the original and the remake differ greatly. In the remake, if you break all the boxes in a level, you get the gem. Pretty straightforward. But in the original, you need to break all the boxes in one clean, undying run. Now, you may have done that no problem in the first level, but it quickly becomes an unbearably unfair challenge the further you go. Even the checkpoint crate, something that radiates safety in a platformer, will not save your progress, only your physical location. I know some people would prefer the challenge, but that part of Crash 1 has always bugged me, and clearly it was on the developers' minds, since checkpoints save box collection in every game after this one. Even if you awkwardly travel backward and recollect every box in a level, the game completely bypasses the box tally screen. You may not even know what you've done wrong in the first place. So that was the first level. If you're playing the original, you've just learnt one of the 2 ways to save the game is by collecting a gem, and they aren't the easiest things to get. Either version though, you've been filled in on the basics of a Crash Bandicoot level. We are then taken to the world map, and though it may not be as accessible as the warp room structure of Crash 2 and 3, There is a certain charm to this that I think the future games miss out on, and it was clear Toys for Bob thought this too when it finally returned in Crash 4. It really makes the world feel tangible, real, less like you're being dropped into a handful of disconnected levels and more like a true journey across the islands. The environment's changing alongside your game progression. In the second level, Jungle Rollers, we come across a red crate labelled TNT. Not hard to assume what this may do, but just in case you decide to spin it, you're still at the beginning of the level, so no progress lost for testing what it may do. The namesake of this level, the Rolling Stones, also demonstrate an interesting development that came with the territory of 3D level design. It was impressive to create a 3D environment to run around in, but keeping the player from cheesing the challenge by simply walking around obstacles was a concern. These rollers will move between blocking your path and leaving an opening. NaughtyDog stated that to make a challenge work, there needed to be a dimension taken away to make up for that added dimension. One of their more potent ideas is taking away time. This is the most obvious in the boulder levels and the hog levels we see a few times in the game, as you don't always have the luxury to take your time and deflate the challenge of these obstacles. Quick thinking and pattern recognition will be your main method of success. This is the same with the bonus rounds. Platforming challenges usually made out of crates. As you go through the game, bonus rounds will get more intensely designed, with Brio bonuses and Cortex bonuses being the hardest. Luckily, however, you get infinite tries to get these bonus rounds right, unless you're playing the original. Now, there is somewhat of a trade-off when comparing them in this regard. In the remake, these boxes actually count towards the box gem at the end of the level, but in the original, finishing them is the only other way to save the game. I understand there was a concern that not everyone would own a memory card, and that's why this password system exists, but why did the saving have to be this archaic? At the very least, the bonus rounds are worth your while, giving you a chance to flex or practice your platforming prowess while collecting a bunch of extra lives. Now, the concept of a life system has been heavily debated over the years. These days, most franchises have chosen to do away with them completely to avoid players being heavily progression punished for running out of them. I've personally never been someone to game over much in many platformers, especially Crash, so the lives end up just being another scoreboard I like watching go up. In the original Crash, where you have to do every level within one life anyway, getting a game over is not even that big of a deal. Slight time loss navigating through the menus, but whatever. You'd have to start from the beginning anyway. Getting to the end of level portal without collecting all the boxes will hard cut you to a tally screen with a violently aggressive animation of Crash being absolutely obliterated by all the boxes you missed in that level. In the original, this is the only way to actually know how close you are to getting all the boxes. The Sane trilogy brings the HUD tally and end of level tally from Crash 3 that allows you to keep an eye on how close you actually are. If you're absolutely certain that you've collected everything and you're shocked to see that somehow you still have missing boxes, that's usually a safe indication that the level you're in contains a secret path, unlocked by collecting the special coloured gems. But for right now, we can't do any of that, so let's just move on. The third level, the Great Gate, returns to the familiar 2D roots of prior platformers. It's funny to see when someone brings up that they think these levels feel like almost a design crutch for NaughtyDog. People have to realise, however, that at this point in time, there were no rulebooks for 3D level design. In the mid-90s, every developer had to create their own design philosophies when creating a challenging 3D space. While Mario 64 may have gone in the more playground approach, Crash Bandicoot instead decided to look at games like Donkey Kong Country or even past 2D Marios, and faithfully interpret their DNA into 3D level design. Of course, adding or removing aspects to keep the challenge high, like I mentioned before, when removing the dimension of time. So while yes, these 2D levels certainly feel like NaughtyDog allowing themselves to chill out on the revolutionizing for a bit, I think interweaving some classic side-scrolling was a neat way to help make the transition to 3D levels a lot more palatable for audiences. Let's take the next level for example, Boulders. At first glance, this may seem like a 3D level that removes the dimension of time, but what if I told you it was simply posing as a 3D level? I mean, sure, you can technically move forward and back, but you'd never move back as you'll be crushed almost instantly by a boulder. And if you spend even a second not moving forward, that same fate will befell you. So the only directions that actually matter are up, down, left, and right. See? It's actually a 2D level. Sure, you're watching the environment come at you in the third dimension, but in terms of your choices as a player, it's very much rooted in 2D. This level is also quite obviously paying homage to Indiana Jones, which this type of level has become iconic in its own right in gaming in general. Next up, we're playing a river level. This introduces you to moving platforms, as well as the idea that some levels will contain more bottomless pits than actual floor to stand on. Sure, in this case, the bottomless pit is water, but Crash can't swim, so it doesn't really make a difference to him. We'll see different themes and evolutions on this type of level moving forward. While the theming is obviously different, you're still playing a variation of this type of level design. After a handful of levels, what better way to shake things up but to take on a colourful boss? Usually these are occupied by Cortex's henchmen, but the first boss has you beating up a native of the island. Now I know that sounds bad, but if you think about it, wouldn't Crash be more native? So Papu Papu here simply takes a few hits to his head while he spins his big tribal stick. In the original he has an abysmally low 3 hit points, but in the remake he has 5. It doesn't really make it any different. Tax on a handful of seconds, I suppose, but honestly it's just kind of funny they felt the need to change it to begin with, given its unradical change to the fight. The other boss fights are slightly more involved. I only say that because the bar couldn't be much lower than just avoid attack, jump on head. But if you want to be honest, that's still what most of them are like, but a slight difficulty spike, and a little shake up with how you move around the arena does improve it somewhat. After that first brawl, we continue on to Rolling Stones, a level bearing the same theming as Jungle Rollers. This is where we start to see repeating themes, one of the classic crutches of any level-based game. And hey, I'm not knocking it completely. Asset creation is hard and time consuming. When it comes down to the level specific mechanics, maybe the developers want to get the most out of it before they stuff it under the bed, never to be seen again. And that's exactly what they do here in Crash Bandicoot. Specific level archetypes never repeat more than once, allowing for almost an easy version and a harder version. First, they'll introduce you to these fire pits, and then the rolling wheels, before giving you their harder counterparts in the sequel levels. Truth be told, the repeating themes problem only makes itself obvious in the first half of the game. Once you pass that, especially getting to the third island, there ends up being far more unique level themes that only show up once and leave forever. This is something even the future games would struggle to do. Being stuck in levels that follow a very typical jungle aesthetic does get a little old quickly, which is why when they're traded in for dark temple ruins and eventually unstable laboratories, it feels more than welcome. Not to bag on the following 2 games or anything, but out of the entire trilogy, this is the only one that makes you feel like you're actually going on a journey. Apart from Crash 4, I still don't think we ever returned to this feeling. Maybe Twinsanity gets the closest? I don't know. Hog Wild is our next level, and we're introduced to another archetype, the hog riding. If you want to be really pedantic, this type of level is really an inverse version of the boulders. You know, kinda on rails, except away from the camera instead of toward it. This does mean you get a better view of where you're going, but you'll never have those breather spots to recenter yourself. You're on the hog going top speed from beginning to end. Well, I guess you could pause the game, but where's the fun in that? These levels are quite fun. I will say, however, that I always seem to have trouble judging the depths on these cooked hogs. I can pretty consistently get the first 2, but the third, I swear, every so often, I just fail it because of issues with depth perception. I guess that's the thing with 3D things on a 2D screen. Your eyes constantly have to fill in the gaps when it comes to where's what. After that, we get to the second native fortress level, which takes that whole depth thing out of the equation. Finishing that, Crash travels to the second island. How Crash gets here, we'll never know. Does he take a boat, zipline, swim? And what's stopping him from just going straight to the third island? I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm leaning towards the zipline theory. After our second river level, we get our second boss, Ripperoo. This kooky kangaroo jumps from block to block while big TNTs flow down from the waterfall. Taking note of his jumping pattern, you can trigger the TNTs at just the right time to blow Ripperoo up. This boss actually has some form of timing involved, which I can appreciate. Sadly, there isn't really any more layers to this boss than just that. Finally, we get some new themes to sink our teeth into. The Lost City introduces a few new aspects of Crash Bandicoot's gameplay. First off, just enjoy the sun-bleached temple ruins on display here. Get used to it because the second version of this level is the longest level in the game by a long shot. Secondly, we can finally put the Brio bonus round to good use. The first Brio bonus round was in an earlier level, but that level also happened to be one with a coloured gem path that we couldn't access yet. The Lost City is home to the first coloured gem of the game. In the original game, getting the coloured gem of a level is the same as any other box gem. All boxes in a level with 0 deaths. In the remake, this remains the same. So while the regular box gems no longer need a 0 death run, all the levels that contain coloured gems still do. I guess that was their way of maintaining Balls in a Vice challenge the original had. As I said before, these coloured collectibles will finally give us access to previous areas containing boxes that were originally unobtainable. Call this needless padding all you want, it may be true, but little kid me was always so excited to go back to a level and discover a new area. Just amazed that it was right under my nose the entire time. It kinda gives the levels a more dynamic feel to them as well. Temple Ruins is the next level, and one thing that always stuck with me even after all these years is how effective the Black Void is to establishing a dangerous environment. It's one of those PS1 limitation shortcuts that ends up attributing more to the game than you might initially think. These levels follow a similar structure as the river levels, where platforms are scarce and death zones are plentiful. Just trade the river water for the gaping bottomless pit and you have these levels. On the other end of the striking void spectrum are the bridge levels. Anyone who's ever played this game any meaningful way knows these levels far too intimately. The steep climb in difficulty may be more attributed to the second of these foggy bridge levels, but all the same, the white void sets a feeling of dread like no other. Unlike most other levels that feel like they have some form of positioning opportunity, these bridge levels force you to play by its pace. Unless of course you figure out how to balance on the ropes, but even that is a skill you need to learn and hone. At this point, we come to another boulder level, and seeing this reminds me of another reason why levels like these exist. Beyond level design, one of the more revolutionary things that Crash had up its sleeve was its visuals. The lush green jungles and the dark stormy castles stand out as being far more detailed than games that favoured the open spaces like Mario 64. The restraint to keep things focused just allowed them to amp up other things. Not without a fight, however. If you haven't watched the War Stories doco where Andy Gavin goes into detail about how they forced the PS1 to its absolute limits, I highly recommend it. But TLDW, they figured out new ways to load in levels in chunks, and even screwed with the inbuilt Sony library to gain even more memory space. Their whole gambit was to achieve an almost Looney Tunes style quality for Crash as a character. Now, while most of the time you're staring at the backside of Crash, leading to the nickname the Sonic's Arse game, the 2D and boulder levels allows you to see all the quirky animations they'd made for him. So anytime you have to backtrack in a level, instead of complaining, why not instead try to enjoy Crash's stupid face? Because as it stands, you don't actually see it that much. The way he runs, terrified of the giant rock hurtling his way, to the way he wipes his forehead after a job well done. Beyond the game itself, the animations are at the heart and soul of Crash Bandicoot. This extends to another iconic part of the Crash series, the death animations. If anyone's even heard of Crash Bandicoot, they'd probably be familiar with the goofy ways the Bandicoot can bite the dust, being flattened, burnt to a crisp, or straight blown up, leaving only his shoes and eyeballs? With Mario, all you really get is a freeze frame with him falling off stage. It was a little different to see your protagonist get absolutely demolished in wacky ways, something that gets expanded on as we go through the trilogy. When we leave this level, it may look like there is a branching path to another level. That's where we would use one of the 2 keys we unlock to get there. Luckily for us, or unlucky, depending on how you're feeling, we can get one of the keys by heading into the longest level in the game, Sunset Vista. Now this level is what can only be described as a gauntlet. This was by far the hardest level for me in the original game. Having to endure the entire thing in a single life was torture. On the flip side, because this level doesn't have a coloured gem, the remake does not have you suffer through that ordeal again. Yes, it's still long and certainly not the easiest level, but the checkpoint crates at the very least do their job. So for those locked levels we discussed earlier, we need to upgrade our bonus icon game even further and go after the ones that look like Cortex's ugly mug. Collecting 3 of these will, you guessed it, take us to a themed bonus round. These are another slight step up in difficulty and also contain boxes needed for the gem. But unlike the Brio ones that waste our time, especially in the original, the Cortex ones reward us with a key at the end of it. There are a total of 2 of these keys that each unlock an additional level off the main path. The first one we get to play is Whole Hog, the second hog riding level. Good fun. The real ending for this island comes in the 3rd boss, Koala Kong. The difficulty in this boss is just how cramped the space is. When the magical TNT spawner above you starts dropping bombs at the same time Koala Kong is throwing boulders, it can get a little hectic. Not too bad though. You don't even really beat Koala Kong here. You just piss him off enough for him to jump on the tracks and get swept away by a minecart. So he'll be back, maybe. Anyway, onward to the final island. By this point in the story, Crash has crushed 3 bosses, ziplined to 2 other islands, collected a handful of gems, including a single coloured gem. So even though we're in what you could say is the final third of the game, there's still a fair bit of collecting to go. Those 5 other coloured gems being a particularly scary aspect. Remember, those gems require a single deathless run, so of course it's only natural that most of them are found in the hardest levels of the game. But hey, I'm a Crash fan, which naturally means I'm a fan of getting my ass kicked by intense platforming bullshit. So I'm here for it. Our first stop is Heavy Machinery. Back to the native Fortress 2D style of level, but with a factory twist. The sheer amount of things that can kill you with one wrong jump definitely makes it feel a whole lot more dangerous. After that, we visit Cortex Power. This level takes more of a top-down approach to its camera, which does make it a little easier to jump on moving platforms that are usually hard to see behind Crash's massive back. I wouldn't bother going too hard exploring this level right now though. You'll quickly notice that the blue gem is required to finish it, and with all those winding paths afoot, I'm glad that for this moment, I don't have to deal with this. Apart from Cortex Power, this island is actually home to a lot of my favourite levels, most of them containing the rest of the coloured gems. Now when I say favourite, I don't mean to say that they aren't hard. In fact, these are by a long shot the hardest levels in the game, but despite my frustration that I've had dying over and over throughout the years, I can't help but love these levels all the same, and Generator Room is certainly one of them. Made out of ominous flying platforms suspended in a dark void, filled with screens displaying Cortex's big face, the pitch black background that it shares with the Dark Temple theme would have been a pretty easy job design-wise, you know, it being nothing and all. But ironically, it's one of the reasons I like these levels so much. It's an aura, you know, a feeling. And of course, the army of screens live broadcasting Cortex's cranium are also pretty iconic. It's here that we pick up the orange gem. Funny enough, out of the entire trilogy, this is the only game with the orange gem as a collectible. Now, Toxic Waste, the next level in our journey, is my favourite level in Crash 1. Never used to be, but I have a bit of an attachment to how banging they made the music in the remake. The original was a lot quieter and low-key, whereas the new one is a little more rock-based. The level itself is a long hallway with varying amounts of barrels that come rolling your way that you either need to jump over or allow to jump over you. It can be really hard to judge depth perception when the angle is so fixed on Crash's back, but with clever use of the sides and a little timing, as well as abusing the few Aku Aku masks in the level, it should be a piece of cake. And hey, another coloured gem for the collection. As we've been travelling the bowels of Cortex's sewer system, you may have noticed the face of who seems to be running the waste management. His name is Pinstripe, and he is our next boss. And he has a gun? Talk about a tonal shift. Here I was getting comedically big boxes of TNT dropped on me, as well as boulders. I guess they've had too much trouble getting rid of Crash, because now they've simply upgraded to assault weapons. It's alright though. It's one of those cartoon guns that shoot out bullets at 1 kilometer an hour, so I think we're good. You just have to switch between hiding behind these sofas and spinning the crap out of him when his gun jams, eventually knocking him out and absolutely ruining that perfect good glassware behind him. Now, a couple real infamous levels rear their ugly heads. Starting with the high road. If the first bridge level was too much for you, good luck with this one. It's here where the babies get separated from the adults, which, you know, is sad for the babies growing up without parents, but hey, they should have been better at Crash. Using the turtles to cover these massive gaps in the bridge is a job and a half. As long as you remember to hold the jump button instead of just pressing it, and make sure the turtles are the furthest forward you can get them, you should be fine. I've seen far too many people rush this sort of thing, and they die over and over and over because of it. Following that escapade, we start trekking up the castle itself. Slippery climb is definitely a hard one, and I think it's worth reminding you that all these levels with coloured gems, which this one happens to be, has to be done in one life. Checkpoints be damned, they are useless if you actually want to complete the game properly, and this level does not pull its punches. It prefers to push them. The peak of side-scrolling level design is here at full brightness. The moving birds, spinning platforms, stairs that de-stair themselves mid-stair, it's all here and accounted for. I'd say it can't get any harder, but yeah, we'll get there. But once again, with a little bit of pattern recognition and most importantly, patience, you'll pull through. The next level is a bit of a gimmick level, but look, I like it, mostly. Lights Out does exactly that. Turn the lights off. But I hear you saying from behind my screen, DaAcorn, just turn up the brightness. Yeah, well, I did that and all I got was slightly grey-black. Instead, we need to keep our Aku Aku mask, seeing as he will be our light source for the level. Except there's one catch. You can only ever have one mask. Getting more will not increase your light source level, and getting hit even once will put you right back in the void of darkness. This level also happens to be where you obtain the purple gem, so basically this level needs to be completed not only in a single life, but essentially in a single hit, because even though you could technically beat this level in the dark, I'd highly recommend against it. So anyway, the next level is Jaws of Darkness. Oh please, don't be another lights out level. Okay, thank God. It's just a temple level. Still hard, but at least we don't have to deal with Aku Aku being our only ticket out of here. This level contains the second and last Cortex bonus round, netting us the final key, which, as you know, unlocks us a secret optional level. Maybe we'll come back to this one. Let's quickly dip into Castle Machinery, which is quite possibly the shortest level in all of Crash Bandicoot. Okay, so obviously there's an actual level below us, but I do think it's funny to bypass it every time I get to this level. Good to stock up on lives as well if the previous few levels have been eating up too many of them. Next, we confront Cortex's right-hand scientist, Dr. Brio. His health bar is a little more intimidating compared to the weaklings we've battled until now, but it's okay. This boss mainly consists of having various chemical beakers thrown your way until he throws slime creatures that are, for some reason, designed to be returned to sender if ever squashed. But he has no problem sending more. Once we get him down to his final hit point, he decides to down what I can only describe as the forbidden Gatorade flavor, which turns him into basically the Hulk. Jumping on him a few times will send him flying out the window. The bosses so far have been simple. That's probably the best way I can explain it. I don't think they're bad, but they certainly don't have a ton of layers to them. At least Brio has a phase change, but even then, overall, I think they do the job. Now, the lab is my personal least favorite level. To get the relic on. Playing it normally and being able to take your time with this level actually makes it a very intricately designed level. Tough but mostly fair, except this stupid part in the bonus round. What's up with this jump crate above jump crate nonsense? It's not particularly hard, it's just kind of finicky. An unnecessary amount of trial and error for a single box. This is the one place where I think technically the original actually has the easier level, because at least in that you don't actually have to do the bonus round at all. The lab can be best described as the ultimate hallway. Hitting switches and beating the doors before they close. These laser gates and lab assistants can be hard to time your jumps with, but as I said before, unless you're doing a dreaded time trial, patience is your best friend and worthwhile ally. This level also gives us our final colored gem, the yellow gem. Finally, the last level before the final boss, the Great Hall. Lucky for me, this is the most straightforward level in the series. Does this technically beat Castle Machinery? Okay, here we go. Put on your gamer glasses, your gamer shoes, and your gamer underwear, because now we're taking on the big man himself, Dr. Neo Cortex. Now this boss is probably the best boss in the game. Good setting, decent phase progression. Look, the competition he had wasn't setting a crazy high bar, but still, avoiding the pink lasers as well as weaving through the blue ones, you can get the chance to spin back the green lasers. Don't know why these scientists keep creating these green version of things that seem to be almost made to damage them, but I won't question the game they're playing. The final hit sends Cortex plummeting down to the ground. Torna and Crash reunite and the blimp is stolen so they can make their way to Insanity Island, because I guess all the zip lines broke. So, Crash Bandicoot 1, a solid game with simple yet effective use of revolutionary 3D game design. What, you want me to talk about Stormy Ascent? Fine! So before we wrap up, we might as well go back through all the levels, collecting every gem we missed using our newfound coloured companions, and making our way to the actual last level of the game. Now, the original Crash Bandicoot outright removed this level. It was deemed too difficult by NaughtyDog, and because it was so late in development, they thought it best to get rid of it altogether rather than tweak it. The remake decided to bring it back. Now, this level is hard, old school hard. Once again, patience is your friend. Seriously, take your time to learn the behaviours of all the spinning and moving platforms, because getting knee deep in the cycle culture of this level is the only way you're going to beat it. I don't really have much else to say about this. There's a Brio bonus round originally designed by the people behind the remake Vicarious Visions. That's kinda neat. In any case, it's time to put all these clear gems to good use by returning to the Great Hall. Jumping from gem to gem, we're eventually met with Torna? Turns out if you're really adamant about never going up against Cortex, you don't have to. Just simply 100% the entire game and bypass that ending altogether. Torna and Crash fly away on certainly a step down from the blimp, and all the bosses even get little ending bios to tell you what they've been up to since the end of the game. Oh, nice. Too bad this crap ain't canon. As we can see from the start of the second game, Cortex does indeed fall, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So Crash 1, do I still love it? Sure, why not? It's certainly aged the worst out of the trilogy, with its outdated view on difficulty to its stiff D-pad centric controls. You can definitely see room for improvement, most of which the remake actually delivers on. With very limited gameplay variation, it can sometimes feel like you haven't got enough to chew on. But on the flip side, this is the only game that feels like an actual journey is taking place. Sure, the other games take liberties with that feeling so they can inject some real wacky themes in its place, but still it would have been nice had they found a way to achieve both those things at once. So Crash had a humble yet incredibly strong beginning. It was a massive commercial success for PlayStation, even particularly so in Japan, where Crash was met with welcome arms by Japanese gamers. It would eventually pass 6 million copies, immediately making it a heavy hitter PlayStation exclusive, and before long a sequel had entered development. But only time will tell if Crash Bandicoot as a franchise was heading in the right direction. I mean, we already know the answer to that, but forgive me for trying to add some suspense to an almost 30-year-old game. Thank you for watching. If you want to watch any more Crash related videos, I've got a bunch on the life and death of Crash Team Rumble sitting on the channel waiting for your viewing pleasure. Otherwise, check out my last video where we dove headfirst into the 3D GTA series with Grand Theft Auto 3. Until next time, stay safe, and I'd like to thank you for watching DaAcorn.